I'd like to introduce you to Patrick Roach, your General Secretary. Thank you, Patrick.
Well, thanks very much, Phil, and good morning to everyone, and thank you for making the time today. I know how precious weekends always are, especially when we've asked you to make an early start to join today's programme, and after what's been a frantic autumn term. Let's be absolutely clear about that, a frantic autumn term already, and it's not over yet. I'm really pleased to be addressing this consultation conference today for the very first time as General Secretary. And since taking up my post last April, I've been reminded of the incredible commitment of you, our members, together with our lay activists and our staff who've worked tirelessly throughout this crisis. And I want to say thank you for what you're doing. The impact of coronavirus has shone a light on the multiple areas of inequality and disadvantage experienced by young workers. The coronavirus emergency has also highlighted how it's young workers, including our members, workers on the front line, who've kept the country going throughout the pandemic. And it's our members, let's be clear, together with workers in our NHS, social care and other frontline services, who are helping to defeat this pandemic and keep the public safe. The demands of your jobs have increased massively since the start of this year, with many of you telling us that you're experiencing workload at levels that are simply unsustainable. And we also know about the impact of this pandemic on your well-being. More than half of teachers have said that they felt that their mental health and well-being had suffered since the start of the pandemic. A lack of timely and appropriate government guidance was said to be the most challenging aspect of working during the pandemic. And whether you're working on site in school or working remotely, we think that your mental health and well-being matters. And we know that your workload, the support you receive from senior managers, and whether you feel it's possible to maintain a work-life balance can all make a difference to your well-being. We know how important it is to address that issue and to give you strategies to manage these pressures or to challenge school-level practices which are not only unsustainable, but also potentially unsafe. We know how vital it is that your physical and mental health and well-being is in ensuring the well-being of your pupils. And the crisis has underlined the importance of putting children's welfare first. We've seen how some children returning to school this autumn had lost learning and many of the social skills that they need so that they are ready to learn. Many have struggled in the absence of the structures and routines of school, and as a result of not being able to mix with their peers. Others, because of difficult circumstances at home, have also struggled coping with isolation, poverty, lack of space to learn, or even violence in their homes. And you know how this will have impacted on children's well-being. We also know, for example, that many of these pupils have not had their well-being addressed since they returned to school. And that's impacting not only on school attendance, but also on behaviour in your classrooms. And again, we are committed to giving you the strategies, advice and support to deal with these very real challenges. It's become apparent over recent months that many of you have had to deal with demands to deliver live streaming of lessons and remote education when you haven't even been provided with the equipment to do the job and where your privacy rights haven't been considered. And this again can not only affect your well-being, but your ability to do your job effectively and to the best of your ability. Now, research by the University College London, published in the last few days, found that for every extra hour that teachers spend marking and planning, there is a significant deterioration in their well-being. And where marking and planning activities are undertaken by teachers in the evenings, at weekends, or during school holidays, this also impacts on your well-being. But also, according to the research, it also impacts your effectiveness in the classroom. So reducing teacher stress and taking concerted action to improve your well-being is, we think, key to helping to improve educational standards and the well-being of children and young people. But whilst the government has verbally acknowledged the contribution that's being made by teachers and clapped for teachers, more needs to be done in practical terms to support your well-being at work. Now, this has been a difficult and challenging start of the school year. And if schools are to get through to the end of this academic year, then it's important that action is taken now to support the well-being of all teachers, not by piling on more pressure for remote learning, not by leaving teachers anxious and stressed about the risk of catching COVID-19 as a result of working in high-risk schools, and not by failing to listen to the views and concerns expressed by teachers and failing to act on your concerns. Now, I could come here today and regale you with statistics, telling you about how difficult and challenging the job has become over the course of the last 9 months. But that's not why you're part of the NASUWT. Being part of the union means that working together, we can strive to bring about change that will make a positive difference to your working conditions, and by doing so, help to improve the learning conditions of your pupils. And that's why it's important now more than ever that you not only continue to be a member of the NASUWT, but also that you get involved in the union. Whether that's by attending an event like this one today, attending a local meeting, or meeting with members in your own school or college, or by answering one of our surveys and telling us about your experiences, or simply keeping yourselves informed and following our advice. 12 months ago, could any of us have ever envisaged the prospect of dealing with a global pandemic, emergency legislation, national lockdowns and curfews? Would anyone have imagined that government would close tens of thousands of schools and abandon all examinations as they did in the spring? But even in these unpredictable and unimaginable circumstances, we responded. You rose to the challenge, colleagues, keeping children safe, providing education when you were locked out of your schools, delivering for young people when the government failed to do so. It's teachers like you who this year made the difference for children and young people. And this week we heard from the Chief Inspector of Schools in England about the damaging impact of the pandemic on the most vulnerable children. But without the efforts of teachers like you right across the country, the situation facing many more young people would have been far, far worse. This pandemic has highlighted how it's our members, together with other workers on the front line, who have kept the country going. And the pandemic has also demonstrated the capacity of your union, the NASUWT, to continue to support and to protect our members. Throughout this crisis, we've continued our efforts on your behalf, lobbying right across governments, across all UK nations, highlighting the issues affecting you. We've been engaging with employers to ensure that members are supported at work. We've been campaigning to secure financial protections for members, including for supply teachers. And we've been taking action to ensure that schools meet their obligations on health and safety at work. And as schools reopen their doors fully this autumn, we redoubled our efforts to provide advice and guidance for members on staying safe at work. And we secured some progress. We secured support and advice for tens of thousands of members to ensure their right to safe working in their schools. We secured thousands of individual risk assessments for members, particularly for members in vulnerable groups. We secured funding for the Health and Safety Executive, which has led to over 5,000 health and safety inspection visits to schools. We secured a government U-turn on the wearing of face masks in schools, and we secured priority access to COVID-19 tests for teachers. And throughout the pandemic, we've been working to hold the government to account as well. And in our 10-point programme of measures, which we published in the past week, we've called on governments right across the UK to take concerted action to keep schools and our members safe whilst they remain open. So what have we been calling for? We've called for stronger guidance and enforcement, for robust action and enforcement from the Health and Safety Executive when schools fail to meet their legal duties. We've called for publication of weekly data on positive COVID-19 cases in schools and colleges impacting on staff as well as pupils. We've called for swifter action to protect public health in the event of an outbreak of COVID-19 in a school or when someone has tested positive. We've called for better protection for vulnerable staff, including those who were pregnant, from a Black and ethnic minority background, or who are disabled. And we're calling for more funding than has been promised so far to help schools meet the additional costs of coronavirus and to protect schools and ensure that schools are not cutting corners on your health and safety at work. And the NASUWT National Executive has insisted on giving members greater clarity about the working practices that you should and should not accept. So do look out for our coronavirus checklists, which we published in the past week. In those checklists, we've set out important tests that you can apply to stay safe and to make your jobs doable. Our checklists make clear that, amongst other things, you shouldn't be undertaking any activities that have not been COVID-19 risk assessed. You shouldn't be required to work in conditions where 2-metre social distancing isn't possible or where no other appropriate mitigations are in place, whether that's the wearing of face masks or having physical screens to separate you from others. You shouldn't be working in classrooms that haven't been cleaned, and you shouldn't be undertaking general cleaning duties either. You shouldn't be working in classrooms that are poorly ventilated or with excessive drafts or that are cold. You shouldn't be expected to work during your lunch break. You shouldn't be routinely required to cover for absent colleagues. You shouldn't be carrying out remote or blended learning activities if you haven't been given timetable time to plan, to prepare and to assess those activities. You shouldn't be undertaking live streaming of lessons where it's not appropriate to do so, or where your privacy could be compromised, or where data protection and child safeguarding requirements are not secure. You shouldn't be participating in drop-ins, learning walks, or lesson observations unless there's a statutory basis to them and they have been risk assessed. And you shouldn't be participating in activities relating to the 2021 examinations, assessments or qualifications that are out with the official guidance that's been issued by government. And that's all about ensuring that you have professional working conditions throughout the rest of this year. It's about ensuring that you're able to focus on the job of teaching without risk to your well-being. And in addition, we've also put onto our campaigning agenda a raft of other matters to help make a difference to you. So we're reaching out to other bodies to ask them to join with us in campaigning on the issues that matter to you as young teachers. We're seeking support for action to protect the mental health and well-being of young teachers. We've made clear our concerns about increasing job insecurity and low pay affecting young teachers. We know that prior to the pandemic, 50% of new teachers left the job within 5 years. And we know how much harder your jobs have become since the start of this year. And we are clear that the country cannot afford to lose young teachers. But we do know that 4 in 5 young teachers say that their mental health has been adversely affected in the last 12 months, with 1 in 4 of you admitting to feeling anxious about work. And that's why we're calling for better resources to help address and to tackle work-related stress and to support your well-being at work. It's also why we're determined that we will take action where appropriate to end bullying at work, to stop adverse management practices, and to challenge poor employment practices that disadvantage young teachers. Whether that's responding to the demands of excessive workload linked to the provision of remote education, or the relentless pressures of learning walks, drop-ins, and excessive lesson observations, or unacceptable pupil behaviour, we're ready to support you. And we have put employers on notice of their statutory obligations, whilst protecting the rights of you, our members, to take legal proceedings if necessary, where employers don't meet their legal obligations on safety and equality. Not posturing, colleagues, but doing everything possible to keep you safe at work. And politically too, we've been working hard on your behalf to lobby politicians across all political parties about the concerns that you have been raising, about your workload, about next year's examinations and qualifications, about school accountability, and about your pay. Now, last week, the Chancellor of the Exchequer published his spending review statement, and that confirmed that the prospect of a public sector pay freeze is now a reality. He said, that's about being fair to workers in the private sector who've lost incomes and jobs, and he said it's necessary in order to pay for the government's emergency measures. Well, we don't agree. We all know the state of the public finances, but that doesn't mean that teachers like you who've kept this country going don't deserve a pay rise. It's a kick in the teeth for teachers, a betrayal of our members who've been on the front line during this pandemic. It's a double betrayal, colleagues, a double betrayal of young teachers, especially those who've recently joined the profession and who were promised access to higher salaries. You have every right to be angry about this. And there's every prospect that a pay freeze next year will be followed by further real terms cuts to your pay in future years. And it all adds up, year on year, reduction in the value of your pay and reduction in the quality of your pension. And the Chancellor's statement marked the breaking of a general election promise of £30,000 starting salaries for new teachers from 2022. The government may take the view that there's no longer a teacher shortage, but the truth is that if government wants to keep teachers in the profession, they must value and reward you fully for the contribution you make to society and recognise you as highly skilled professionals. And employers that use the Chancellor's message on public sector pay to hold back teachers' pay and salary progression this year or next year are also on notice from us. We know who stands to lose most, where employers get away with exercising their discretion over your pay. It's younger workers, it's women teachers, it's black teachers, it's disabled teachers who are most likely to find themselves at a pay disadvantage compared with other colleagues in their schools. Such practices, colleagues, are not fair, they're not right, and they're probably against the law as well. So I ask you, colleagues, contact us if your school is threatening to hold back your pay award this year, or if it says that you shouldn't expect to receive a pay award or pay progression this year or next year. Colleagues, this crisis has shown your union's capacity to respond to the big issues of the day by putting you, our members, first. Never pretending or misleading you, and never playing politics with your jobs, livelihoods, or futures. but instead listening to what you tell us and putting the interests of teachers first. So these are unprecedented times. They're challenging times for all of us. But as a member of the NSWT and with your active involvement, I can assure you that we will continue to support you through these challenging times. So please stay safe, look after yourselves, stay involved, and thank you for the amazing work that you do and for your continuing support.
Thank you very much, Patrick, for that speech and presentation. It must have been extremely comprehensive, Patrick, because we haven't got any questions yet. So keep the ball rolling and keep you busy on a Saturday morning. I'm going to start the ball rolling with quite a difficult question. I know you engage regularly with all governments and the DFE. What's your gut feeling about when things might get back to some kind of normality? Now, there's a really difficult question for you, Patrick. Or is there always going to be a new norm?
Well, this question of the new normal, I think, is one which foxes us all. What is that new normal? I certainly hope that there will be a new normal, but a new normal which is going to be a better normal as far as our members are concerned. When are things going to get back to normal? Look, there's a lot of optimism, isn't there, about vaccines being rolled out, and we certainly hope that that's going to deliver the impact that is so desperately needed. But I think we have to learn from what we've been through over the course of this year. We can't take anything for granted. We've got to learn that we've got to build more resilient education systems and ensure that we build resilience into our school workforce. We can't carry on expecting everything to be done by teachers. And if that's part of a new normal, then that's certainly something that we need to be campaigning for. We can't carry on expecting schools to deliver for children and young people on a shoestring. So if that's part of a new normal, then we've got to construct a new normal where we're investing not just in schools, but in services for children and young people. When will things get back to normal or back to a better normal? Who can say? I think back in April, I was hoping that we might have got to that point by the summer. And then by the summer, I was thinking, well, let's hope we get there by Christmas. Well, we're nearly at Christmas and I still don't know. So I'm not going to pretend, Phil, that I've got the answer to that. But we've got to campaign for a better normal whenever that time comes. Okay,
thank you. One more, Patrick, in terms of we've got young teachers listening in today, and I think this profession, and I've been in it many years, has always been challenging. But again, I think for young teachers in particular, what have we been picking up from young teachers as being the main challenges they're facing in classrooms across the 4 nations of this country?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good question because, I think what young teachers are facing in many respects mirrors what all teachers have been facing. So I've talked a little bit about some of that already, about workload, about the pressures that are being placed on them, including the pressures to do more and more and more and achieve better and better for their pupils. I think that young teachers are also facing those pressures, if you will, around the precarious nature of their jobs. You come into teaching perhaps because you want to build a career in teaching, and yet that you're only as best as your last day in the classroom, as far as some schools are concerned. But I think we also know that building a career for young teachers is a big challenge. It's a challenge around that discretion that employers have around not just hiring and firing, but how they might be able to enable young teachers to progress in their careers, but also how they can block young teachers progressing in their careers. Access to pay progression clearly is really, really important. And we've told governments this, we've told the independent pay review bodies this, but it's vitally important that young teachers, that those who are coming into the profession for the first time, can have an aspiration of being able to move on, to get on in their careers, and quite often that's being denied to them. So we've got to ensure that teachers are clear about what their rights and entitlements are in terms of their jobs and their careers, and that's going to be backed up by employers doing the right thing rather than doing their own thing. But those challenges around workload, around management practices, around well-being, and as of course around the career in teaching, are crucially important for young teachers in particular, but I think they're also important for the generality of teachers, and that's why it's vitally important we do have the active engagement of young teachers in the discussions that are taking place locally and nationally within the NASUWT, because it's really, really important we're hearing the voices of young teachers coming through loud and clear as we're planning our policy and our strategy and our campaigning on behalf of our members.
Okay, thank you, Patrick. And I know something that's very close to your heart is the Equalities agenda. I know this crisis has really raised some key issues there. Would you like to say a few words of some of the things that we've had to deal with and respond to in terms of that agenda as a result of COVID-19?
Yeah, well, I mean, the Equalities agenda, I hinted at it in my address. It's the kind of flip side as well of the whole health and safety and well-being agenda, because yes, we want to have workplaces and working conditions which are healthy and safe for all of our members, but we also need to ensure and be doubly sure that it's safe for particular groups of our members, those who are perhaps some of the most vulnerable. And I spoke about, some of those vulnerable teachers, whether that's about underlying health conditions, or whether that's because, a teacher is pregnant, or whether that's because a teacher is in a high-risk group, perhaps because they've got a disability or they're from a Black or Asian background. We know how this pandemic has cruelly impacted on teachers within those groups. So it's really important that we're speaking out on behalf of those groups of teachers. But, we've come up against real challenges in that regard from governments that frankly are paying lip service on equality. And it's really, really important that we call that out as well. When governments say it's not in the public interest to talk about equality in the context of this pandemic, well, quite honestly, we have to challenge that kind of government thinking, because that kind of thinking and that kind of approach can only be discriminatory. And I've seen since the start of this pandemic, back in March when schools were being closed, and right through, I've seen how this pandemic and how schools and governments have responded to this pandemic has had an impact, a detrimental impact, disproportionate impact on younger teachers, on pregnant teachers, on Black and minority ethnic teachers. And it's really, really important that we continue with the support of members to call that out, because equality does matter.
Okay, thanks, Patrick. And I'm going to give you an opportunity here to be a bit of a salesman, actually. We've got participants here who are obviously bought into the NASUWT message. And I think young teachers are the best people to take that message out there for other teachers to join the NASUWT. What makes us different, Patrick? What makes us worth joining as opposed to other educational organisations?
Well, because we're simply the best, aren't we, Phil? I mean, do I need to say more? But I mean, it's more than that. It is more than that. I'm absolutely sure that we are the best in terms of representation, being there for our members when it matters. And I know for many teachers who are starting out in their careers, if they've had the good fortune, let's just say, to have undertaken their initial teacher training in a higher education institution, many higher education institutions will encourage teachers, new teachers, to join a union. But joining any union, frankly, isn't really the answer. You've got to join the right union. You've got to join a union that's actually suited to the job that you're doing, a union that takes that seriously, a union that's actually led by teachers for teachers. And there isn't any other union that does that UK-wide other than the NASUWT. So we're there at school level, we're there at local level, we're there throughout every region and every nation across the UK. We're there speaking on behalf of teachers, putting teachers first as part and parcel of our campaigning locally, nationally, and indeed internationally. So again, because we're the best.
Thank you for that, Patrick.